All right, let's start with a brief overview of CVP analysis, which stands for Cost, Volume, Profit Analysis. And as you can see, it's the study of the effects of changes in cost and volume on a company's profits. And it's important in profit planning. So I really like CVP analysis because it allows us to do a lot of what if scenarios. What if we raise the price $2? How will that affect our profits? What if we sell 10,000 more units? Things like that. I probably have an example here on the next slide. So it's a critical factor in setting sales prices, determining product mix, and maximizing production facilities. So determining what products we're going to sell and how much. So here's some typical questions that we could ask. What sales volume is going to be needed to earn a certain amount of income? So we want to take home $100,000 a year. How much product do we need to sell in our business? Or what is the change in volume if selling prices decrease but sales volume increases? Or how much does income increase if we install a new machine to reduce labor costs? What is the income effect if we change the sales mix of our products and services? So there's a lot of great information that can be had from CVP analysis. And there's 5 basic interrelationships or components that we need to consider here when we're doing CVP analysis. One is going to be the volume or level of activity, the selling price, unit variable cost, total fixed costs, and sales mix. So we're going to have to delve into each one of those items in a little bit more detail, particularly the variable and fixed costs coming up. So we do have some assumptions underlying CVP analysis, and it's important to note that the behavior of both costs and revenues we assume to be linear throughout the relevant range of activity, and I'll get into relevant range and that behavior here in a minute. Costs can be classified accurately as either variable or fixed. Changes in activity are the only factors that affect costs, and that's a pretty big assumption because that's not always the only factor. That all units we produce are sold, again, a pretty big assumption. And when more than one type of a product is sold, the sales mix will remain constant. Okay, so let's start talking about variable versus fixed costs. So variable costs change when activity level changes, and total costs remain unchanged when activity changes. So here's some examples. I have the total fixed cost. If you think of your basic cable bill, typically, whatever, let's say it's $100 a month. It doesn't matter how much you watch TV that month, you're still going to pay $100. You could be on vacation and not even turn on the TV in your house, and you're still going to pay $100. Oops, sorry, I didn't update my slide there. Fixed cost per unit. Now, the average cost per show decreases as more shows are watched. So our basic cable bill is $100. If we don't watch any shows, we're going to pay $100. But the more shows we watch, the cost per show then actually goes down. That's with a fixed cost. Now, total variable cost, if you think that's the pay-per-view portion of your bill. So it's all dependent on how many on-demand movies you watch. And that will increase linearly with every single movie that you watch during the month. And the variable cost per unit then is constant. So typically, let's say your cable provider charges you $4.99 for every movie. I know there's some fluctuations there, but we'll go ahead and make that assumption for this. So for the charge, not per minute, but per every movie charge is going to be the same, regardless of the number of movies that are watched. So the way that the behavior of the cost works is that variable costs, the total variable cost changes as activity level changes, so it goes up. But the fixed portion of that variable cost, the cost per unit, remains the same over wide ranges of activity. Now, fixed costs remain the same even when the activity level changes. You could watch your TV nonstop for an entire month. You're still going to pay the $100. But the fixed cost per unit, so the actual cost per show, goes down the more that you watch. Let me give you a pretty neat example. I have a really good friend who runs a Holiday Inn, and he was giving me some examples of the costs, variable and fixed, that he incurs running his hotel. So variable costs for him would be items like toiletries, Those run approximately $1.80 per room per night. So that would be your shampoo, toilet paper, lotion, things like that. Linen processing, he said, is roughly $6 per room. That includes your labor, soap, water. Cleaning per room is $4. He said the average wage is $8.50 per hour, and it takes about 20 to 25 minutes per room. Breakfast on average costs $2.80 per person, or roughly $5 per room. Now again, this is really interesting to me, because if you think about it, business people really need to know this information so they know how to price their products appropriately so they can earn the desired profit. Now he has some fixed costs, and he had a really interesting example I'll share. And those fixed costs are things like the cable bill. So he has a contract with a cable provider, and he said it's roughly $10 per room per month. Now, whether or not he has anybody staying in those rooms, he's still going to pay that fixed cost. He even was renovating a hotel, and Comcast was enforcing their $25,000 a year contract, even though the hotel had been closed for over a year for renovations. So you can see those fixed costs you really get hooked into, and they don't change even when the activity level changes. Okay, let's talk about relevant range here for a minute. And you can see I have two graphs up here. And if you think about it, a straight line relationship really probably doesn't exist for variable costs throughout the entire range of possible activity. You can kind of see it's a little curvilinear here. And the reason for that is because at abnormally low levels of activity, it may be impossible to be cost efficient. For example, small scale operations may not allow the company to obtain quantity discounts for raw materials or to use specialized labor. In contrast, at abnormally high levels of activity, labor costs may increase sharply because of overtime pay. Also, at high levels of activity, materials costs may jump significantly because of excess spoilage caused by worker fatigue. So in the real world, the relationship between the behavior of a variable cost and changes in the activity level is often curvilinear, that you'll see here. In the curved sections of the line, a change in the activity index will not result in a direct proportional change in the variable cost. Okay, so fixed costs also don't have a straight line relationship over the entire range of activity. You can see there's like a stepping here. So what happens if you think about it? You can operate at a certain fixed cost to a certain point. So you could have a building that's 2,000 square feet, but there may become a point where you outgrow that building, you have to go buy a new building. And then that will allow you to grow to a certain size, and then again you may have to go out and find an even bigger facility. So fixed costs also are not completely linear. Let's see here. So the relevant range is defined as the range of activity where a company expects to operate during the year. So most companies are going to operate between the 40th and 80th percentile. They're not going to operate on either side of the extremes there. And in that relevant range, a straight line typically does exist. And that linear assumption is going to produce more useful data for CVP analysis, as long as the level of activity remains within that relevant range. So you can see here, within the relevant range, we do get a pretty straight line there. And same thing again for fixed costs. So if we know we're going to operate within this particular range, the line is going to be flat. For example, office space is available at a rental rate of $30,000 per year in increments of 1,000 square feet. As the business grows, more space is rented, and then again we would have the cost increasing. So the last comment here about variable and fixed costs. So typical types of variable costs, you can see here examples would be raw materials, direct labor, factory utilities, sales commissions, shipping costs. Other types of fixed costs, real estate taxes, insurance, supervisor salaries, depreciation, and advertising.